Scott, just look. Scott looked up from his book, turning his attention to his wife, Eve. She held a strange-looking doll in her hands, with soiled hair and a smeared face. I don't understand. Cracks were visible in some places, 2 large teeth protruded from behind the mouth, strongly resembling human ones. Torn and wrinkled clothes, very small limbs with crooked fingers. This doll seems to have escaped from a horror movie, and the cheapest one, in which such toys are usually made as scary and ugly as possible in order to somehow catch up with fear. Is he somehow ugly? Scott answered more or less gently, so as not to offend. You don't understand anything. Eve pressed the doll to her, hugging her tightly. Yes. It's been a year since their 5-year-old son died. Parents did not watch. The boy ran across the road to look at the dogs, and then the pack did not show friendliness, attacked the child and bit to death. And somehow the face of the doll resembled the face of their son at that moment. Red, crooked, with 2 large teeth sticking out among the meat. Only the doll seems to have plunged her face into a pile of shit, and after that she rejoices. Aren't you glad? Our baby is back. Of course, dear. I am very happy. Eva gazed at her husband, stroking the doll. Scott returned to the book. Of course, he was hurt by the loss of his son, but going to such extremes was not his part. This made it even worse, like picking up an old wound, and the thought that his beloved wife had gone crazy made the situation not pleasant. You're not happy, Scott. Actually, you don't care. He ignored her as she left. I just listened to the loud footsteps and sobs. Then the door slams. And silence. Scott put the book down and closed his eyes. There were no more tears, but I wanted to cry. Soon he will lose his wife. A week later, Eva still left the room. She still kept the doll with her. Scott tried not to look at such a terrible replacement of his son. We just talked peacefully about how we would spend the weekend. Summer is in full swing. Why not have a picnic? For a long time we did not go out into nature in order to freshen up a little, take a break from the bustle of the city. Scott wanted to talk about the doll, but didn't bring up the conversation. I didn't want to upset my wife again. Maybe play a little, and then everything will pass. At least Scott hoped it would. When the weekend came, they all got together, Scott, Eva, and son. A very strange picture emerges. The couple laughs, communicates, eats delicious food, as it should be done at a picnic, but a creepy-looking doll sits nearby and watches. Watching a happy couple, birds and small animals. He listens to what they say, singing and rustling grass. Feels the wind. The doll is alive. Or does he pretend to be? Life gradually improved. Eva was able to calm down thanks to the doll. Scott ceased to annoy his beloved with such behavior. Even sometimes he played along with his wife, playing with his son. Here it is, happiness. The family is in full force, if it can be considered so. Now life does not seem so gray. But everything is just beginning. As soon as everything got better, when suddenly another misfortune appeared, Eve to weaken. Every day it got worse and worse. Scott even took time off to be with his sick wife. Doctors only shrugged their shoulders, prescribed some medications that did nothing to help Eve recover. All this time the doll was near. She watched the poor girl suffer. And the only cure that keeps Eve in the mind and feelings. Scott was glad of this, at least somehow his beloved clung to life. Soon Eve began to delirious. She called her son, screamed loudly and moaned. At such moments, her body crumpled. Then Scott noticed something strange on the body of his wife. Above the navel is a perfectly round wound, covered with a hard crust of flesh and slightly bulging. You could see something pulsing under the crust. Scott gently touched the wound, but his wife stopped him in an instant with a firm grip on the wrist, which surprised Scott. Eve became normal for a moment, looked angrily at her husband, and said through her teeth, "Do not touch." After that, the gray color of the skin and the sick look of his wife returned. Scott couldn't believe what had happened. His instincts told him that something was definitely not right. Now life has become like a horror movie. Scott quit his job and stayed at home all day, all in order to get his wife back. She is not the Eve he knew. She became half-crazed, thin and gray, like a plague. A pitiful semblance of a man. And that doll. Eva does not part with her for a second. Scott tried to take the creepy toy away, but Eve wouldn't let him. It was too late to attempt to get rid of the doll. Scott didn't want to go to a specialist. I was not ready to admit the fact that everything that happens is outside any human laws. Maybe his instincts are deceiving him? Maybe it's all a bad dream? Scott already dropped his hands. He was confused, didn't know what to do. And he himself gradually turned into a miserable likeness of a person, because from the beginning of all these events he began to drink slowly. The only solution to all his problems was cheap booze. Soon it will end, because the budget is not endless to spend on drinking. At times they were all together. Scott, Eve, and the son got together like in the good old days. We sat in the living room, in complete silence, each in his own projection. The light had not been turned on for a long time, and there was practically no food left. Just empty bottles, excrement and vomit. The smell of urine is so stagnant that it has become an analog of an air freshener. Eva played with her son and told him various stories. Scott ignored it. I even forgot that not one lives. And during the next such gatherings, Scott noticed something. When he looked at the doll, it seemed to him that the toy began to acquire something like flesh. Not even like that. The plastic, or what the doll was made of, crumbled, and bare flesh began to emerge from under the open spaces. Even the black eyes have disappeared. Instead of them now are real, human eyes of a cloudy color. The teeth began to show, and the hair grew noticeably. And the doll itself became a little larger. The funny thing is, Scott didn't react at all. Blame everything on the fact that he drank to such an extent the dolls began to turn into real children. One fine day, Scott heard very strange sounds that woke him from his sleep, as if someone was greedily sucking the last of the juice. Scott decided to check if he was imagining it. He took a nearby chair as protection. Firmly holding his weapon in his hands, Scott went into the living room. The sounds came from the wife's room. As Scott made his way there, he carefully put his ear to the door. A hand slowly rested on the doorknob. Slightly pushing and opening the door, Scott flew into the room, ready to attack, but the chair fell out of his hands. That same doll sat on Eve, sucking everything out of her with its long proboscis, like a mosquito. Flesh pulsed, secreting clear mucus. Dull eyes darted around the room until they turned their gaze to Scott, who had just entered. The proboscis broke away from the body of his wife. Now it is a real leather bag with bones. A wide smile appeared from under the proboscis. Something that looked like a grotesque likeness of a fly, and a man squeaked loudly, jumping up and down in place. "Now it's your turn, Daddy. I hope you are as delicious."
I never believed in mysticism and treated all mystical stories with indulgence, considering them to be just another Tales from the Crypt. But what happened to me last spring shattered my whole idea of mysticism into small pieces and made me look at this industry from a different angle. Let's introduce ourselves. My name is Eugene and I am 48 years old. I have been looking for a place for a long time, for solitude with my memories, a small house outside the city. Having examined already a decent number of plots and houses, I noted with sadness that they are all monotonous and monotonous, do not cause any desire to settle inside. Yes, I am so picky. With my modest income, give me a chic mansion with modern furniture. Well, this, of course, I exaggerate. I wanted something beautiful, tender, so that as soon as you enter the soul would sing and rejoice. And finally, luck smiled at me. The price is reasonable, and the house itself is just a fairy tale. I became attached to him at first sight. And it would seem that one should have immediately thought about why such a cheap price and such a good product. But that didn't bother me that day. Having given the required amount from hand to hand, I decided to immediately stay overnight in my new home. Having carefully examined the building, both outside and inside, I found a very comfortable room as if created for me. Having spread the bed linen and going out onto the balcony, I watched the sunset for a long time until it was dark. Finally, when it was completely dark, I went to bed and breathed in the smell of my new home. He smelled of some wonderful flowers, and this smell hovered everywhere. Together with the fresh air from the half-open window, this smell was intoxicating and intoxicating. Feeling relaxed and drunk, I quickly fell asleep. And he woke up just as quickly. The room was impenetrable darkness, only the outlines of the furniture were visible. The room has become completely different. I saw the silhouette of a massive closet that gleamed in the sun during the day, but at night, when no light came through the open window, this massive giant seemed furry. And yes, the smell is different. I sniffed the air and almost threw up in disgust. It smelled of rot, dampness, and dust. Together, this bouquet of smells created a very vile sensation. I finally opened my eyes and the dark veil slightly dissipated. Finding my phone and turning on the flashlight on it, I gently shone it in the direction of the cabinet. The darkness reluctantly parted to the sides, and then I saw something that made my hair move and stand on end. No, it was not a corpse. It was mold. Disgusting green moss, cobwebs, slime, mold. The closet was rotten and overgrown. Yes, what can I say? Not only the closet, the whole house looked like a monster that emerged from the swamp. I almost yelled as I got up from my hitherto pleasant bed. The mattress, which I could not see because of the thick darkness, now seemed to glow so that I could take a good look at it. I almost felt sick. Solid moss and mummified corpses of pigeons and sparrows pour out through the holes. When I noticed a layer of dead cockroaches, without restraining my reflexes, I rushed out of the room and stopped. The rotten floor beneath me creaked disgustingly. I sniffed the air and barely resisted the urge to vomit. Rotten, thick, sticky, this smell cannot be described in words. My head became clouded and I, ignoring the rot and squelching sounds under my feet, rushed forward. Having descended the shaky stairs to the first floor, I rushed to the exit at the risk of falling under the ancient floor. It was only when I ran out into the fresh air that I was let go. Taking a deep breath of fresh air, I decided to take time off to spend the night with my neighbors, but my head, apparently completely clouded by the stinking smell, decided to point my legs in a completely different direction. Not knowing what I was doing, I ran in a completely different direction and, stumbling on a stone, fell like a bag right on my stomach. There was a small stone wall in front of my nose and I got up and decided to see what it was. It turned out to be an open well from which this nasty smell was coming from. I doubled over again, barely able to contain myself. Thoughts turned off again, intuition worked. With difficulty lifting the rotten lid from the well with unbending fingers, I closed it. The smell began to dissipate. And in my head there was a feeling of confidence that everything is right, as it should be. And with this thought, I calmly fell asleep, passed out right on the grass. I woke up in the morning, the birds were singing and the sun was blinding in my eyes. The house is like a house, a well is like a well, but I hastily packed my things and left that house. And although I know that now this should not happen at night, I never spent the night there again. Now the house is on sale for a very small amount. And I'm waiting for the right buyer who will pay attention to the item in the description of the house. Never open the well,